Hi. Can we hear each other?
Yeah, hello.
Oh, hi. I think I'm chairing. This is session 9. I'm assuming all our speakers are here. Maybe just give 1 more minute.
Hello all.
Hi, I can see 11 participants at the moment. Can you all hear me? I'm assuming if there's any problem, we can just use the chat. While we are waiting maybe one more minute, I just want to introduce the speakers. And this is our panel on enduring conflicts in Eurasia. And we will continue with the same order of the program. The first paper is going to be Bezen Coskun from Berlin Center for Applied Turkish Studies in Germany. And then we will move to Javadbay Khalilzade from Kent State University in the UK. We have Rahimullah Kakar, European University of Flensburg in Germany. And then Ebru Birinci, Lomonosov Moscow State University in Russia, and Matthew Lubin Duke University in the US. We will finish with Elena Onu, the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration in Romania. Each speaker is going to have 15 minutes, the usual, and as the chair, I will remind you last 3 minutes to make sure that we will have enough time for a question and answer session. And I think it will be good if each speaker also can introduce who they are in terms of where they are in their research at the moment. I'm assuming our first speaker, Bezen Coskun, is ready to start. Are you here, Bezen?
Yes, I'm here and I'm ready.
Okay, great. You have 15 minutes and I'll warn you the last 3 minutes. Do you have a PowerPoint to share?
Yes, I have.
Okay, I'll give you a minute to sort that out.
Anyway, I don't really need for PowerPoint, so I'll go ahead.
Okay.
It's much more complicated with PowerPoint. My name is Bezen Coskun. Right now, I'm a research fellow at SWP Berlin Center for Applied Turkish Studies. Today, I'm going to present one of my chapters. It's part of a project on conflict resolution in different regions. We have just published Western Balkans region, and this project is on the Caucasian region. So we are working on the different conflicts and conflict resolution possibilities in Caucasus region. So I'm going to talk about the Abkhazian conflict and trying to find out how economic concentration, economic security can be a resolution for the Abkhazian conflict. So as most of you know, Abkhazia is situated in the northwest Georgia. Currently, it's a de facto independent republic, which is only recognized by Russia and some other Russian ally states. Except for these states, Abkhazia is recognized as formally part of Georgia. The so-called Abkhazia conflict has started after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, when Georgia annexed Abkhazia. 1992-1993 was the peak of the conflict. It was a war period. Abkhaz people won the war against Georgia in 1993, and in 1999, Abkhazia declared its independence. However, it took around 10 years for Russia to recognize Abkhazian statehood. In 2008, after the Georgian-Russian War, Moscow recognized the Abkhazia as an independent state. Even though we don't have witnessed any serious armed conflict since 1993, Abkhazia still is one of the conflicted issues of the Caucasus region. The aim of this study is to investigate the origins of the conflict in order to explore the opportunities for conflict resolution, if any. For the analysis, I use Copenhagen School's economic and societal security approaches. After a detailed exploration of societal origins of the conflict, I tried to come up with a resolution idea which is based on economic security concept of the Copenhagen School. First of all, demography was a definitive factor in Abkhazia conflict, not just in Abkhazia, but in all Caucasus region. Soviet's population policies have negatively affected inter-ethnic relations. As all other Circassian nations, Abkhazian people were displaced several times throughout their history. So the events leading to 1992 Abkhazia War reflects a recurring pattern in which the language and ethnically motivated policies have played a key role. Thus, the conflict was driven by societal concerns of both sides, where Abkhazians felt that their national identity and culture was under threat. So the starting point of the conflict was about societal security. The outbreak of the armed conflict was a reflection of years of tensions over political issues, which have developed around the issue of ethnic identity and the origins of Abkhazians. During the Perestroika and Glasnost periods, Georgian nationalism took an extreme form based on the idea whereby Georgians are the hosts and the other ethnic groups are the guests, often ungrateful because they had no right to self-determination on the territory that historically belongs to Georgians. So their slogans were Abkhazia is Georgia and Georgia is for Georgians. They demanded the abolition of Abkhazia's autonomous status. Georgian nationalism triggered national movements in Abkhazia. Abkhazian insecurities grew in the face of the Georgian aggressiveness. So even though societal security is the best conceptual framework to analyze the roots of this conflict, because it's an ethno-political conflict, for the resolution of the conflict, societal security concerns have become the main obstacle. As experienced in many protracted ethno-political conflicts around the world, reconciling societal consideration of conflicting sides is extremely difficult task. Competing claims of security threats to national identity and nationhood are proved to be the most difficult issues to be resolved. That is why many conflicts in the Caucasus region remain as frozen conflicts. In this context, Georgian law of 2008 occupied territories, it prevents the international access to Abkhazia, while Abkhazians contribute to their own isolation by showing minimum flexibility on the status issue. The involvement of external actors with different societal security concerns has made the resolution more and more complex. Historical enmities and tensions between Russia and Georgia, between the US and Russia, and between the several members of EU and Russia further complicated the conflict resolution. As indicated by Bezen, security is about the pursuit of freedom from threat and the ability of states and societies to maintain their independent identity and their functional integrity. The bottom line of the security is survival, but it also reasonably includes a substantial range of concerns about the conditions of existence. Bezen also underlines the economic security is being one of the key indicators of the general security of the state. It's clear that with economic security, other sectors of security become easier to establish. So in the case of Abkhazia, the perceived threats to their respective national identity and communal existence were the underlying reasons behind their enmities with Georgia. Right now, there is no direct societal threat directed at Abkhaz region or Abkhaz nation. Thanks to Russian patronage, there is no immediate threat against the Abkhaz nationhood in the region. However, Abkhazians paid a heavy price for their societal security. Right after the war and throughout the 1990s, Abkhazia was totally isolated without much aid from Russia. The sanctions that Russia imposed on Abkhazia were lifted only in 1999. During this period, Abkhazia barely survived thanks to limited trade arrangements with Turkey. The state of economy in 1990s was drastic. Today, the Abkhazian economy, thus economic security, heavily dependent on Russia. So no one benefits from Abkhazia's isolation. Economically, all sides of the conflict, including Russia, need to better engagement with the international community to improve the living conditions of Abkhazians and Georgians. Here it's argued that economic security concerns of the conflicting parties may pave way for the reconsideration of options for future resolution. That is to say, when the pressure of economic security threats overweight the societal security concerns, the conflict resolution would be achieved. So in terms of economic security, both Georgians and Abkhazian economies are very fragile right now. As a result of unrecognized statehood, Abkhazian economy is much more fragile than Georgia because Abkhazia today is a relatively, even though Abkhazia today is a relatively self-governed territory, a functioning de facto state. However, the international isolation made it dependent upon Russia. Russia is the main route for Abkhazia to the world. After the war, the country has gone through a reconstruction process, and government buildings, hotels, and roads have been reconstructed. But the economy of Abkhazia is linked to the Russian economy and banking system. They use Russian ruble as the currency, and they use a special Russian debit card named APRA, which was only used and accepted in Abkhazia. So, as stated by Trigva, he is the former foreign minister of Abkhazia, if Georgia recognizes Abkhazia's independence and the proper interstate relations are established, the entire Caucasus region will benefit from the reconciliation. Despite the lack of official level resolution to legalization of trade between two sides, an informal trade between Georgia and Abkhazia has already started. The fall in the Russian ruble has reduced the purchasing power of people in Abkhazia. So Abkhazians started to demand goods from Georgia, which is relatively cheap. According to International Crisis Group's report entitled Abkhazia and South-Ossetia Time to Talk Trade, between Georgia and Abkhazia, the trade worth an estimated US dollar between 7 to 15 million per year. While Georgia resists recognizing the status of Abkhazia, Georgian leaders are open to at least talking about legalizing the trade with Abkhazia. Furthermore, in order to open a trade corridor, Georgians have been trying to find ways to work with Russia. To conclude, economic security threats are prioritized in the context of Abkhazian conflict now. Thus, both governments and people, they are trying to find ways to build a transit corridor for economic exchanges. Such exchanges that include Abkhazia, Georgia, and Russia have huge potential for further collaboration and resolution. Mutual benefit is the key for these exchanges. The prevailing international economic conjuncture and that has destabilized and stabilized national economies is pushing conflicting parties to legalize trade with each other. Furthermore, the growing trend of informal trade between Abkhazia and Georgia can reinforce the potential for a resolution. The conditions for the resolution are ripened. Economic security considerations make them ready for a mediated agreement. First, for the legalization of trade between Georgia and Abkhazia, then to establish a transit corridor to reintegrate Abkhazia with the rest of the Caucasus region. If succeed, further steps will be taken for the resolution of the societal security concerns too. However, since reintegration will bring the question of legalizing the trade, the legalization of trade is about the issue of status. During the legalization process, Abkhazia would insist on the use of its official name. So the resolution of the conflict is still out of reach until conflicting parties and potential mediators will recognize the benefits of a resolution, which is based on the recognition of APkhazla in status. I close down here, so during the question and answer time, we will deep in more. Okay, thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you so much. I was almost going to warn you that you still had 3 minutes. Excellent
Okay.
timekeeping. Thank you very much. We are going to move to our second speaker, Javadbay. Are you here? Yes.
Yes, I am here. Could you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm assuming we all can. Do you have a PowerPoint to share?
Yes, I have PowerPoint. Let me open it here. With share,
Share screen, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, it is first time that I. Okay.
Well, yeah, I won't be able to offer any help. The only thing I know is there's a green arrow says share screen.
Yes, I tried it, but it asks extra security measures. Just a minute. Okay, let me try one. Okay,
Does anyone have any clue or can offer help? Yes, that's it.
I think yes.
Yes, we got it.
Great.
Yeah.
I did it.
Good.
Okay,
well done.
great.
Well done. Do you want to just introduce yourself a bit? Where are you in your research? What you are doing?
Yes. Well, I am a PhD student at Kent State University. I think they mixed it with Kent University in UAE, United Kingdom.
Okay.
So it is in US, Kent State University.
All right.
So it's not a big field, but I just wanted to share it with you.
I was curious myself. I said, well, I haven't heard of it in the UK, but yeah, that's okay.
Yes, and and I am a student. I am working on my. I have some courseworks, and actually, these papers is my paper for my course, and I try to transform it to publish. So therefore, I wanted to share with you and get some review that what's like. And well, to begin, I will also talk about another conflict in Georgia. You know well that South Caucasus is a small geographical area rich with their conflicts. Well, I would like to share map. It is a, I don't know, see you my mouse or not. It is in the yes, great. So it is South-Ossetia in the north of Georgia, and it is North Ossetia, which is a federative part in Russia. So my presentation is about a possible conflict resolution, but with the track 2, track 3 relations, and how diplomatic tracks, how civil society, how apart from governmental discussion, we can change conflict and resolve conflict. So my presentation is consists of 2 parts. In the first part, it is how I present how like populist and nationalist discourse caused conflict between 2 communities, and later how applying ARIA framework into this conflict could be a solution for conflict. So a bit about historical background. Ossetians began to settle South-Ossetia, modern-day South-Ossetia, in the around 14th century. They settled in the lands of Georgian nobilities, and their name also, Ossi, came from Georgia, called them as Ossi, and they took their name from Georgian language, and later it accepted by international community as well. So I will go very fast this part because it is just historical background. So until like 19th century, Ossetians were as a peasants in the Georgian landlords, and they live together because they also share same religion and the close language. So it is they have not very big differences. However, with the development of nationalism and nationalistic ideas in South Caucasus, national conflicts began to emerge in South Caucasus. So the first Ossetian-Georgian conflicts also emerged in the eve, like after this First World War, when the Russian Empire collapsed, when the Mensheviks established Georgian Democratic Republic, and at the same time, Bolsheviks began to rule South Ossetia region consul. They elected to the South Ossetia consul. So there was a dispute between Menshevik. Although they were Menshevik Georgian government, they also carried some nationalist feelings. So there was some dispute between Ossetian Bolsheviks and Georgian Mensheviks, and also they Ossetians began to kill Georgian nobilities and rejected to pay tax to Georgian Democratic government. So there was a small dispute between them, and Bolsheviks, Russia, before transforming into Soviet Union, they supported Ossetians, but Georgian army defeated Ossetian Bolshevik revolutionaries, and they expelled them from South Ossetia to North Ossetia, to Russia. And this historical trauma, first clashes and historical trauma, deeply affected two nations. When Soviet Union established it in the region, although Georgian Soviets rejected accepting South Ossetia as an autonomous oblast. However, they have to accept it in the end because Russia insisted. And also, it should be also need to highlight that there was not a economic relation between South Ossetia and North Ossetia. South Ossetia economically was part of Georgia economic sphere, and also until 1980s there was not. Nowadays they say I forgot the name. There is a narrow pass between North Ossetia and South Ossetia. So even only in 1980s, South Ossetia linked to North Ossetia. So when we come to the declining or weakening of the Soviet Union, so nationalist feeling began to emerge in both countries, particularly Georgia, and Gamsakhurdia was very strong nationalist figure in the South Caucasus region, and he defined Abkhazians and South Ossetians as traitor, as they have they work with Russia against Georgian national statehood. So this nationalist feelings polarized two societies. But until that time, Georgian and Ossetians live it together. There is a large, there was a good relation between two communities, and also intermarriage was very high between two societies. But however, when this nationalist feelings emerged, this environment changed, and when, as Dr. Bezen said, Gamsakhuurdia declared all national minorities as a traitors, foreigners. They claimed Georgia for Georgians, and also they prevented inclusion of these national minorities to elections. They didn't let them to participate in national elections to be represented in Georgian parliament, which caused a war in early 1991-92. And after that, South Ossetia declared its independence when Shevardnadze toppled Gamsakhuurdia with the support of the Russia. There was like a relative peace period. I say it's relative because they South Ossetia, like Abkhazia, declared its independence, but it didn't recognized by any country, including Russia, during that time. And after that, there was like a very little relation between two communities, but Russian, Georgian, and South Ossetian peacekeepers controlled the region and boundaries between them. And so it is a relative peace period. But when Mikhail Saakashvili, like with the revolution, toppled Shevardnadze, the relations also between South Ossetia and Georgia began to deteriorate, because particularly Russia didn't welcome Saakashvili, and Saakashvili was known as a democratic figure in the region, democratization. So, well, I think, and however, Saakashvili also increased the centralization of Georgian state. Although they included autonomous Azaria to and abolished its autonomous status. So Saakashvili also was like a, for instance, he also proud Gamsakhuurdia. He said that sooner or later South Ossetia will be part of the Georgia. Well, in the I call it that there is a constructing promises and deeds in Saakashvili period, and it also really deepened the polarization between society, because the latest survey and study by Gerard Toll says that actually South Ossetians really fear Georgian nationalistic states, governments. So it is they see Georgian threat for their survival. How and current status in at the end after the 2008 war, there was this Saakashvili's policies led, and there is a complicated, nobody agree who launched the war, but the war is fact indeed. So it occurred in 2008, and Russia recognized South Ossetia, and after that EU, Soviet United States, United Nations, and they organized the Geneva International Discussion Group, and now it's like around 50 meetings. They discuss. They were successful to prevent escalation of the conflict. However, there is not any significant development beyond these discussions. So what I offer, I offer ARIA Framework, which theorized by Joe Rothman, who offers how we can overcome nationalistic conflicts. There are 4 stages of ARIA Framework, which in first it is antagonism. We blaming, polarizing, attributing, projecting. We parties discuss these important issues: why the conflict occurred, how it occurred, so what is the roots of this conflict, and they openly in discussion groups, they began to talk about these issues.
Your last 3 minutes.
Okay, I am trying to finish. Resonance, in resonance, they accept their antagonism and their blaming each other, and after that they change to resonance, which blaming means respective responsibility, polarizing, which turns we, not you and us versus them, but we, and attribution, analytic, empathy, and self-awareness and ownership. After this, but it should be noted that ethnic conflict is one of the toughest conflicts to solve. So this period needs time, but here I couldn't due to time. So invention, in this stages, we invent creative solution. For instance, cultural, educational, or just for weddings, for instance, or anniversaries that they can meet Ossetian and Georgian community members, so can meet and share and mix their ideas. And action, it is actually after this, and invention also means that offering possible solutions, projects to both Ossetians and Georgians participate in these projects. And in action, actually, project planning, negotiation, problem solving, and institution building, which is in this action, we realize these projects that we, in the stage 3, we invented, we realize this project. I should note that it doesn't mean that in 1 month or 3 months, we will realize this project, but we first need to discuss our differences and what are the reason our conflict between community leaders. Later, we try to invent solutions. So I believe that Georgia and South-Ossetia, Abkhazia have a historical differences than Ossetia, because Ossetia was really part of the Georgia, but Abkhazia, for instance, controlled by Russian Empire in 1860s, but Georgia in early century, so after 50 years. So I tell that the opportunity to resolve South Ossetia is much more possible, higher than Abkhazia or other conflict in South Caucasus, Nagorno-Karabakh, because they share same religion and they have high intermarriages. The only reason, Russian factor, yes, I didn't include it, Russian factor, Russia is really most important factor, because Russia used these conflicts to protect its influence in the region. So I included Russian factor, it is well known, but in my paper I refer how could be, because EU and Russia all participate in Geneva International Discussion Dialogue platform. So I believe that, instead of just discussion, at least attempting some projects would be beneficial in the long run to the resolution of the conflict. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your impeccable timekeeping as well. We shall move to our third speaker now. I'm assuming Rahimullah, you are here.
Thank you. Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, great. Yeah, the floor is yours, the usual. If you want to introduce yourself very briefly, and then I'll remind you in your last 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Rahimullah. I am based at the European University of Flensburg in Germany, still studying here. And I'm researching on the post-war peace and conflict resolutions. And recently I'm conducting research on the European Union actorness and it's as a normative power, the question of normative power. In this paper, I will be briefly discussing the the assessment of the Brussels Conference on Afghanistan and the Afghan peace and reconciliation puzzle. I don't want to go more into deep, but briefly I will recap the contemporary Afghan conflict, which after September 11, 2001, the terrorist attack happened in the World Trade Center and in New York and the Pentagon, which was carried out by the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden. So the leader of those notorious organization was reportedly hiding in Afghanistan. The then US President Bush administration stepped up and asked the Taliban leadership to hand over the leaders of the terrorist organizations, which those demands, and also to suspend the terrorist safe havens in Afghanistan, which those demands were not met, and it resulted to attack their government, which on 7th October, the US, with the support of the Great Britain, attacked the Taliban government and toppled down. So as a consequence, the new power structure, or the new government structure was introduced, which initially, under the auspice of the United Nations and the US, it held in Germany, Bonn, which the conference is referred to as Bonn Conference, and also sometime Bonn Agreement, and an interim administrations was established following by a transitional government. The Bonn Agreement and post-Taliban order was a stepping stone, which for the upcoming political and government structures and power transition. Those new regime came into being and established, but the question of the militant organizations of the Taliban, it remained unresolved. What happened? Could they be isolated? The hard power strategy was used for the last 19 years. If I refer to the immediate post-2001 era, so the conflict intensified with every year coming, which badly intensified in 2010 and 9 and onward. But the usage of hard power or a military strategy to remove them was become so hard for them. And then the previous government under the President Karzai, the peace initiations or the peace effort started in 2010. But those were not successful because the peace, it was the program which they initiated was named Afghan Peace and Reintegration Program, APRP, which was launched and aimed to reintegrate the militant organizations and member of those on the condition if they quit the battleground. In return, those returnees would be provided with jobs, security, protections, and other facilities required. But the peace process was unsuccessful because of the few factors. The first, the peace process was relatively vague, lack of a clear government-centric determination, and also the peace was a military-driven strategy. It was not a political-driven. And also the absence of regional consensus, which those lack of those factors caused the peace process to be unsuccessful. So the peace talk was perceived as part of military strategy by the ISAF, I mean the US-led forces, which was, they had a campaign, a killed capture campaign to use against the militant. And the result was getting deteriorating, and that was not the case to reintegrate them. So then under the administration of the current president, I mean, it's the second tenure, but on the first tenure of him in 2016-17 onward. So the ambition again came into being that the peace process has started. But the main focus of the paper is the post-2016 Brussels conference, which happened in 2016, 4th, 5th of October in Brussels, which the 75 countries and 26 multinational agencies and organizations, they attended the conference in Brussels, and the opening remarks were by the President Ashraf Ghani and the then President of the European Council, Donald Tusk. And as a result, a joint communique was signed to support Afghanistan and the following three dimensions. The first was Afghan-led state and institution to be supported, and second, a continuous financial support until 2020, and even if required beyond it. And the third one was to supporting Afghanistan on regional and international level, particularly enhancing economic sectors, and most importantly, provide support to a political process which was aimed at lasting peace and reconciliation. Those were, I call it like the stepping stone, which push the political, which I mean to say, to make the environment conducive for the current peace process. As one of the main dimensions of that conference was to support Afghanistan on regional and international level to pave the way for a lasting peace. So the regional factor was one of the important factors to make the environment conducive for the peace process. So regional initiatives such as the Heart of Asia Istanbul process, which was initiated in 2011 back, but this process was more, become more peace-oriented and lately, which the latest conference was in 2019 in December, which a member of those forum to say are the Central Asian countries, C5, and India, Pakistan, Iran, Kyrgyzstan, also Central Asia, plus Saudi Arabia and UAE, and two leading regional countries, Russia and China. So their aim was to set a stage for regional concerted efforts and motivate the region and member countries to use their influence and on the Taliban to return to peace settlement, and as well emphasized on the women participations in the peace process. Those were one of the few factors that, and also in addition to them, like the RICA, Regional Economic Cooperation Conference in Afghanistan, and Shanghai Cooperation Organizations, and some other regional forums and organizations were more trying to normalize the environment for the peace process to start. So as a result, the peace process started in 2018, which after multiple rounds of negotiations, the agreement reached between the Taliban, the militant organizations, and the US in February 2020. But I call it a triangular tussle, because still the Afghan context, the Afghan government, it's still not yet resolved, but the peace process agreement was signed with the United States in February, which they had certain conditions and yet to be reached, and this is a conditional based agreement. But luckily, the intra-Afghan negotiation has recently started in Doha, capital Qatar, of Qatar. So this started, and it's still continue. It's earlier to comment how it will go, but we believe there are certain factors and also more principles and also the agendas and points to be discussed. So it still continue. But I'm referring in to say how this process or the question of legitimacy would it be, and how it resembles in the past to others, and how the past experience which happened. I'm referring to the research by the RAND Corporation, which they conducted the research in 13 countries. A few to mention, in this case somehow seems similar, like the Yemen conflict in 1992 till 1970, civil war in Lebanon from 1975 till 1991, and Mozambique 1976 till 1995, in Bosnia 1992 till 55, Tajikistan 1992 to 1997. So this research by the RAND Corporation, it shows this, the outcome of all those conflicts has been neither an absolute winner and neither an absolute loser. So the research extracts a master narratives that unfolds the following the following steps, which it says that the
your last 3 minutes.
Okay, I'm just concluding.
Okay, great.
So this is the opposing parties. It should be considered as a legitimate negotiation partner. And also the role of the external power and identification of the intention of the external power or actor that is involved in the conflict. And also the concept of power sharing with the insurgents that contribute to the de-escalation and paving the way for them to step into the involvement in politics. Last but not the least, the third party guarantor, which somehow these are visible in the contemporary Afghan peace process. This has a resemblance. But a last comment, the concept of peace and reconciliation and the question of zero-sum game. This is there a peace yet? Is to refer to the Johan Galtung research, which he talked about the negative peace and positive peace and the absence of violence and the social justice and other factors. Still, those violence is protracted and there is still violence and there is no ceasefire. We cannot say this is still a negative peace even, and this is the start of this one. And the reconciliation, yes, reconciliation is going on, and because the warring parties are trying to be on the same page, and they are struggling, and the efforts are going on. So last but not the least, this process is still going on, but the ice has been broken by this, because still it's going to be on a right direction. So we are hopeful for this, and thank you for listening to me. So I'm giving the floor back to Professor Ayla Gol. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahimullah. I think all speakers have been really, really good with timekeeping, and we shall move to the next paper, which is Ebru Birinci. Again, Ebru, if you could just please briefly tell us where you are in your research. And I'm assuming you are here? Yes, you are.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ebru. I'm studying in Moscow State University, and I'm a PhD candidate. And by the way, I'm trying to share my PowerPoint. Do you see it? And so I'm basically studying on the Russian Middle Eastern policy, and it's Israeli vector. And today I'm going to talk about the change and the continuities of the Russian Middle Eastern policy by the instrumental role of Israel in this process. Before starting to before starting to talk about the Russian Middle Eastern policy itself, I would like to remind some basic characteristics of contemporary Middle East politics. That is basically carefully considered by the Russian authorities and also influenced by the Russian policy. This is the regionalization of the Middle Eastern politics, with the increased role of regional powers and alliances apart from the external powers initiatives, increased confrontation along the sectarian lines, not based on a great power competition, a resistance to forced regime change and the social and political turmoil, and decreased involvement and influence of the United States in the region. These are very important for the formation of Russian Middle Eastern policy. There are three main dimensions of the Russian Middle Eastern policy. These are prestige, security, and economy. I'm going to use some concepts of constructivist and realist theory of international relations, like identity, recognition problem, and security, balance of power, and etc. Because I believe that Russian Middle Eastern policy is more about its global status, I'm going to focus on prestige issue and also to save some time for going deeper in the analysis. The formation of a multipolar world order is in which Russia itself consists of a pole among other global actors, is one of the concrete political aim of Russia since its formation in 1991. For the creation of a multipolar world order, Russia first followed the westernization policy of its politics and society and economy. Against the backdrop of this westernization politics, Russia has lost its interest and also in its influence in the Middle Eastern region. But it could re-establish its diplomatic relations with Israel, which is the most important Western ally in the region. And it also accepted the United States' leading role in the region. It is important to point out that from Cold War to 19th Cold Peace, from 19th Cold Peace to the Second Cold War period and starting in the 2014, as yesterday Richard Sakwa named it, the Middle East conflict and later peace process has continued to be a central subject to Soviet and then later Russia. During the Cold War period, the great power rivalry has fueled the Middle East conflict as Soviets supported their Arab customers against Israel. Even Soviets sealed their diplomatic relations with Israel for 25 years after 6 Days War. Such a zero-sum game in the region restricted Soviet room for maneuver and influence in the region and in the later peace process, like in Camp David. This is also admitted by Soviet diplomats like Primakov. And when we come to the military operation in Syria in 2015, it is widely accepted by both Russian and Western and non-Russian, let's say, the analysis that this operation in the beginning, had little to do with the region itself. It was more of an effort to bypass Western sanctions, which is isolating Russia from the world politics. And it was also a reaction to Western initiated forced regime change. And the success of Russia in this operation, I mean success because what Russia tried to get was succeeded. It's not a success for the future of, I cannot say now that it's a success for the future of Syrian civil war, brought Russia back to the global politics as an influential actor, and it brought Russia back to the table with its Western partners again. And on the contrary to Cold War period, current multilateral policy of Russia towards region helped the consolidation of its honest broker role, and with its bilateral pragmatic relations with the political actors from Hamas to Israel, from Iran to Saudi Arabia, and inside Libyan civil war, gave a great leverage to Russia. Even Russia now is, not recently, last year, Moscow hosted the intra-Palestinian talks for the reunity of Palestinian sides. Beyond the efforts to gain prestige across the globe, there are also security and economic concerns of Russia that I will now not talk. I'm not going to talk about it now. If I have time later, I will back. So and also because I believe that this is mostly about the prestige and the Israeli role of this in this policy is mostly supporting the gaining prestige globally for Russia. Is I'm going to more focus on in this dimension. So in such a regional balance of power, Israel is a necessary actor for the augmented leader role of Russia, while among Arabs, Russian mediation already gained importance with regards to damage credibility of United States. And besides its influence on the Arab countries of the region, the United States policy is also important for the Russian-Israeli relations itself. For example, during the Obama administration, the coercive policy of Obama against Netanyahu contributed to development of relations on the leader level, especially between Russia and Israel. During 90s, the most important concern for Israel was the guaranteeing the Jewish Russians immigration to Israel. So Israel didn't stand up with its Western partners against Russia in Ukrainian crisis, in Chechenian war, or in the Russia-Georgian war. Israel was acting very pragmatically. And when it comes to Syrian war and Russian involvement in the Syrian war, Netanyahu government, although their interests, their future plans for the region were very different, Netanyahu government could adjust its security policy, considering Russian role without confronting a greater role of Russia in the region, and because it was mostly aiming to control its enemy in the region, or with the help of Russia, like Iran or Hezbollah. Also, the leaders matter here, because Netanyahu, who already has a great relation with Trump, is also displaying its relations with his relations with Putin to increase its image inside the country. As you see in this photo, this was in election campaign, and Netanyahu's argument here was something like playing in different leagues. Well, this kind of treatment of Netanyahu is exactly helping Russia's prestige to promote itself as a global power. And this global powerness during Cold War was based on a polarization, but now it's based on, now Russia is mostly trying to maximize its cooperation and collaboration in the region with pragmatism. I'm coming to conclusion. Russian Middle Eastern policy is pragmatic and realist in the most cases. Middle East is not a priority region for Russia, that it would risk a confrontation with the West or United States or its allies like Israel. Russia is aware of its limits in the economic and military level. It's not trying to replace United States or claiming its role in the Middle East, but it wished to restrict its United States or Western unilateral steps in the region and, of course, globally. Talking about the continuity and change in the Russian foreign policy in the Middle East, I would say that diplomacy is the continuity, an important tool that Russia earlier in the Soviet period was is very vital for Russian policy. While during the Soviet period, Russia was using diplomacy to help one against another. Now Russia is using its diplomacy to ensure, to guarantee its interests at the maximum level through multilateralism. And the balance, Russian-Israeli rapprochement and collaboration serve the enhancement of Russian honest broker role in the conflict in the region. And Israeli vector of Russian Middle Eastern policy is indicating the possibility of implication of an alternative Western approach to the region, which also avoids a zero-sum game in the region, which happened during the Cold War. Instead, it's embracing the pragmatic dialogue and cooperation despite the conflicting interests of the parties. Thank you very much. If I don't know if I use my time or no.
That's perfect timing again. You still have 2 minutes, but I didn't have to warn you because I knew you were coming to your conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we are still seeing your screen, sharing your screen. If you could just log off, we could just go back to normal. That's excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Ebru.
Thank you.
And we can move to our next speaker now. Matthew, I think you are here, but you need to unmute yourself.
Yes.
That's it.
I do not actually have a PowerPoint. This is a kind of intellectual history talk for which I thought PowerPoints might be distracting.
Great.
And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to the IEPAS for inviting me and allowing me to give this paper. Of course, I know that this paper is on an earlier subject substantially than the other papers on this panel. The choice of the subject of a 16th century, you wanted me to say a little about my research. I'm one of this slowly growing group, I think, who are trying to straddle the divide between doing Renaissance Venetian history or Italian history more broadly and having a steady interest in the Ottoman Empire that is not relegating it to a minor subject, but actually trying to learn both sets of languages and to incorporate both Ottoman and Italian and Latin sources systematically in our research. And in some cases, as in the case of the Cyprus War of 1570-71 that I'm talking about today, we have a lot of sources in both sets of languages, and I suppose you could say from both sides and from multiple points of view. So I'm turning my dissertation, which had to do with Cyprus and what happened to the Greek Orthodox population of the island after the Ottoman conquest, into a book that tries to look at more of the Greek Orthodox world, including Crete and other islands that were also going to be conquered by the Ottomans later, and to try and analyze the nature of Ottoman imperialism, which with a little imagination, we can easily bring up to date into the present day and see the salience. So I'm analyzing a fatwa, as the Ottomans call them, or fatwa in Arabic. Today, I mean, fatwas are a subject matter that, you know, a broader audience is going to be familiar with for no other reason than because of the Salman Rushdie affair of 1989 and later. I'm trying to look at how the early modern Ottomans justified going to war, which is a distinct category of Ottoman fatwas. The fatwa was most often a responsum to a theological query that muftis would issue ever since the office of mufti had emerged in about the 11th century CE. And I've chosen today to take as an example the fatwa which the highest Ottoman Sunni authority in the imperial hierarchy, the Shaykhul Islam Ebussuud Efendi, who was in office from 1549 to 74, issued in 1570. Let me turn that up a little bit. Approving of the conquest of Cyprus. Let me first read from the text of the fatwa, obviously in English translation, my English translation, and then try and situate it within the history of Islamic jurisprudence concerning war. So this is a version that was reproduced by Ebussuud's much younger contemporary, by which I mean he was born 2 years before Ebussuud died, the Ottoman historian Peçevi, sometimes called Peçuilu, in the 1640s. He says, formerly a region was in the abode of Islam, and after some time the miserable infidels invaded and had evil intentions against the faith of Islam with the destruction and neglect of madrasas and mosques and blaspheming of and abasement of minbars and mahfils, minbars being the pulpits of mosques and mahfils, the platforms generally where muezzins chant when they are being led by an imam in prayer. And so many sorts of abominable actions, and the refuge of the faith, the Sultan's Majesty, proclaimed the acts of evil deeds to every part of the world, and took the aforementioned lands from the hands of the miserable infidels. And his nobility and his effort added it on to the lands of Islam. Formerly, in a treaty given to his hands making peace with other regions, it was in the possession of the aforementioned unbelievers. Is it prevented that his nobility should order the breaking of the treaty according to the sacred law that included the aforementioned territory? And just to summarize Ebussuud's answer, al-Jawab, he says that God who knows all should ever prevent this is not probable. It's an interesting piece of hemming and hawing, but I think that is accurate to the Ottoman. The Sultan of Islam, may God most high exalt and glorify him, at the time when he made a peace with the unbelievers, it was legal to the benefit of the whole of the Muslims. If that peace, if peace will never result, it is not licit. And after this treaty is made legal, either perpetually or temporarily, if in a beneficial time its abrogation seems most profitable, surely to abrogate it is proper and necessary. And then Ebussuud continues with a long discussion of the sometimes called treaty or truce or pact of Hudaybiyah in early Islamic history, when the Prophet negotiated a truce. He and Ali negotiated a truce with some of their opponents in Mecca, and then when the time was ripe, as Ebussuud implies, broke this treaty and eventually did conquer Mecca, as was their intention. So there is a great deal one could say, but in 15 minutes, let me go straight for the jugular. Approaching this fatwa as someone who concentrates on Venice, but who has looked into the history of Cyprus in some detail, I think the vagueness of the language has to be a quality that one points out. Let me note first and foremost that Cyprus is nowhere named in the fatwa. There's no doubt among later historians or scholars as to it concerning Cyprus, but I still think this needs to be made explicit. I suppose the vagueness in places and times we might say is characteristic of theological documents, except that in his discussion of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, Ebussuud is suddenly very precise about dates and points out that this took place in the 6th century of the Hijra of the Prophet and so forth. So the vagueness about dates also is interesting. Fatwas often use placeholder names, as does Islamic jurisprudence in general. In particular, for instance, speaking about Zayd and Amr as kind of placeholder names for men, and Hint or similar names for women, the equivalent of Jane and John Doe. But the vagueness does make the assessing of the merits of Ebussuud's Efendi's arguments a bit difficult, and this is unfortunate because I don't think we should just dismiss this as typically flowery Ottoman prose. I think there are arguments here which deserve to be taken seriously. The specific mosques and minbars that the Christian rulers of Cyprus had supposedly destroyed, for example, are not specified. This is a topic about which we can supplement what he says in the text of the Fatwa with the writings of other historians, both Western and Ottoman. So far as I'm aware, the most prominent Islamic shrine on Cyprus at that time and still was the Hala Sultan Tekke in Larnaca, also known as the tomb of Haram, where a female companion of the Prophet is buried. This had been built ostensibly directly after her death in the 7th century CE, but it had fallen into obscurity. And so far as I know, we don't have reason to think the Ottomans were aware of this tomb's existence until the 18th century, when the Italian pilgrim to Jerusalem, Giovanni Mariti, tells us that it was rediscovered and that the Cyprus governor of the time in the 18th century, Ali Agha, built a surrounding shrine and mosque complex. Or another story has it that the dervish Hassan Aga built this mosque complex. But there's no documented connection, although one sees in a good deal of secondary literature an implied connection between this tomb and the 16th century Fatwa. And no historian who's actually either contemporary or close to contemporary with Ebussuud connects those dots for us. I also think it hard to argue that, hard to dispute that this Fatwa is ambiguous about what treaty, what adname, as the Ottoman has it, as the Ottomans called it, or sometimes sulhname, is actually being referred to here. The text of the Fatwa elides over the fact that Cyprus had a very complicated political history. It had had a joint Christian-Muslim condominium between Byzantines and Arabs between the 7th and the 10th centuries, 688 and 965 CE to be specific, 965. And then the Byzantines assumed control of the island fully, and then subsequently the Latin Crusaders, led first by the Knights Templar and by Richard I of England, assumed control of it in 1191 and sold it to a French-speaking dynasty, the Lusignans, the very next year, 1192. So again, it's not clear to me. Eventually it passes into Venetian hands as a protectorate in 1473 with the Lusignans still ruling, and then they abolish the Lusignan royal house in 1489 and Venice assumes full control. That doesn't seem to me an invasion by infidels. It's a gradual stepping up, I suppose, of Venetian control over the island, but as at a time when Christians were already in control of the island. So again, what this invasion precisely, when it is supposed to have happened, it seems to me Ebussuud is flattening out historical events that actually were spread over numerous centuries. And I would be hard pressed, and I'm not sure anyone knows exactly which of these military actions he's referring to in the Fatwa. Furthermore, despite general references to Islamic schools and mosques, the Muslim population of the island by 1570 consisted only of merchants passing through transients in the ports, and their presence was actually not exactly encouraged by the Venetian government. Then we have the rhetoric of the Fatwa, which is that the news of the crimes of the infidels spread abroad to every corner of the world. Just to bring it to the present day, I would say this is a more weighty way of presenting the conflict than most historians would regard it, which is as a relatively minor Eastern Mediterranean campaign, most historians today. Relatively minor, made famous above all by the Battle of Lepanto, by far the most well-known part of the war for Cyprus, which Colin Imber, however, demonstrated was not actually all that significant for the Ottomans, who both won the war despite being beaten at the Battle of Lepanto and rebuilt their fleet almost immediately. So there's one possibility, which is that the brash rhetoric of the Fatwa is a kind of prestige statement trying to show off. However, I'm hard-pressed. It strains credulity that the closest fellow Muslim power, which was the Safavid Shahs in Tabriz in Persia, would have been concerned about Cyprus hundreds and hundreds of miles away, and they were no serious rival for Ottoman rule over Cyprus. So I'm just not convinced about the argument for prestige being the main consideration here. Nonetheless, it remains interesting that this Fatwa was publicized by those who collected Ebussuud's Fatwas soon after his death, where it was included in the sections of Fatwa collections labeled Kitab al-Jihad. It was, in other words, if we consider the kind of spectrum of public and private, there was apparently no objection to publicizing the text of this Fatwa. This did not qualify as the sort of state document that had to be kept secret, apparently. I know I don't have that much time. you know, as many of you will know, in my country, the United States, there has been a long constitutional history question about war powers and whether, in particular, presidents or Congress should have the principal authority to declare wars, as well as how legitimate an undeclared war can be. And this has cropped up time and again, but it was especially a fiercely fought battle just at the beginning of the Republic in the 18th century. So I do think it is legitimate to see Ebussuud's fatwa within the light of kind of division of powers and where the authority lay. It's interesting, as a Venetian historian, the lack of discussion of muftis and the process of istiftah that resulted in such fatwas being issued. And I can't help but think that one historiographical reason is the almost exclusive narrow focus on the sultans in the minds of so many early modern Europeans as the fount of all political authority might have led them to downplay the authority of the Sheikhul Islam, the leading mufti in the empire, and to therefore neglect or disregard his authority. We do have, just to give a kind of counter example to this, the 1683 campaign, the Siege of Vienna, is an example where apparently, according to a later historian, Silahtar, an Ottoman fatwa was issued saying it is not licit to engage in this campaign, that an earlier treaty with the Austrian Habsburgs had to be respected, but that the Ottoman Pasha went ahead and led the campaign and the siege anyway. But in general, although fatwas are often called non-binding, it does seem clear that Ebussuud in particular enjoyed considerable authority.
Last 3 minutes, please, Matthew.
Yeah. Sure. So therefore, let me move to the conclusion, which is simply, I think Ebussuud's Cyprus fatwa kind of bears out what seems evident from a couple of recent studies by the historian Joshua White on what he calls fatwa diplomacy. And this is that the Ottoman pacts, which they call ahnames, and that's the word they apply also to the Prophet's Treaty of Hudaybiyah, had always been signed before fatwas on the subject of international relations come into play. That is, in matters involving foreign policy, not all ahnames were followed by fatwas, but every occasion we know of when a fatwa was issued on the subject of the legitimacy of war appears to have been preceded by an ahname. And in the light of Ebussuud's Cyprus fatwa explicitly approving the breaking of an ahname, we should consider whether the word truce, with its implication of a temporary provisional agreement, is not a more clear translation of ahname and more accurate than the still often used treaty. And I think it is in that kind of philological precision that the studies of these fatwas can yield fruit, both within Ottoman history and in attempts to understanding the long-standing question asked by the American historian Franklin L. Balmer back in 1944, and implicitly already in the 1840s by Leopold von Ranke, of when it was that the Ottomans were integrated in and became merely one player in, instead of a little understood outsider to, the European concert of states. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was, again, very, very precise timekeeping. We shall move to the last speaker now, as Elena Onu, and I'm sure there will be lots of questions in all the papers already given. Elena, are you here to just unmute yourself? I don't think our last speaker is here. Let me just check the list of participants in the current session. No, we don't have Elena. So yeah, I mean, it seems we have extra 15 minutes, Matthew. If there's any extra point you would like to add as your conclusion, or we shall move to question and answer. I already have questions for all your papers.
Where to begin, except that the continuities, I suppose, between Ebussuud and earlier practices are something worth, I think, bearing in mind. One can go back to Ibn Taymiyyah already in the 13th century, and he's writing along very similar lines, even if with not exactly the same language, about the licitness of warfare against the Mongols. This despite the fact that the Mongol Khan had recently converted to Islam, but he's concerned to, it's hard not to read Ibn Taymiyyah's fatwas that are directed against the Mongols and not think of Ebussuud's against the Kuzulbash, which he also wrote about, the Shiite sympathizers, or some would say Alevis, but were feared to be Shiite sympathizers in Eastern Anatolia, because they use some of the similar language. They both are interested in the concept of what constitutes the Bahi, or sometimes the Dar al-Bahi, the abode of rebellion. And if you show yourself to be a rebel, then you, as it were, forfeit your status as a Muslim from the point of view of being protected from being essentially stamped out. But this is rhetoric that applies in the case of kind of heretical movements such as the Kızılbaş and people who were Muslim converts. And it's interesting that Ebussuud uses different language in the Cyprus fatwa, where there's no question of the rulers of Cyprus being Muslim. That's not even an issue. So he doesn't have to establish that, versus the space and attention that he devotes in the case of the Kızılbaş and in other fatwas to establishing first the non-Islamic nature of the groups and peoples in question, and then on that basis establishing the licitness of war. Maybe I should leave it at that so as to not hog my time.
No, I think that was great, because I just wanted to double check that maybe she's just unmuted, but I can't see her among the participants, which gives us some extra time, but we can obviously finish if there aren't any questions. I think where you finished, I just want to pick up as continuity and change, because as you highlighted, your paper goes back historically, but gives us lots of food for thought, that the legitimacy of warfare. I mean, I was really interested to hear, especially fatwa diplomacy. This is really looking back the 15th, 16th century through today's international diplomacy perspective. I mean, those of you who were at the first session, Richard Sakwa also highlighted how diplomacy is becoming so important in post-COVID-19 international system and international organizations. What I highlighted in all of your papers is obviously the session is ethnic conflicts in Abkhazia, in Eurasia, and we started with Abkhazia, Georgia, and all these Afghanistan, Cyprus. I mean, in the sense that whether we frame the, not 1570s, but 1970s conflict in Cyprus as an ethnic conflict, or the conflict of two strong nationalisms coming from both Greece and Turkey, is really the common themes. So I think one of you already used the term frozen conflicts, and I was taking notes and thinking about, can we see as change, as continuity, frozen conflicts as a continuity in South Caucasus, in general Central Asia, or even in the broader context of Eurasia, is an interesting question. So I would like to ask to all the paper givers, in the sense that what is the Russian factor? For instance, I know Rahimullah, you didn't have time to focus, or the previous speaker didn't have time to focus on the Russian factor. So is the Russian factor in the post Cold War period is a change, or is there any continuity what Russia is trying to see either in the Middle East in Ebru's case, or in the Caucasus in different papers? And I know there were some conflicts between the Ottoman and Russian empires. I mean, two empires had the longest century, and the wars, the First World War is being the last war. I mean, is there any sense of, in your research, for instance, the Russian factor in what you were looking at, that fatwa diplomacy? So basically, if you have any ideas about, maybe a minute or two, just to share with us as what the Russian factor has changed or continued to. Shall we go as the reverse order papers, Matthew, while you are still on mute, and the historical background?
Oh, okay, yes. Here's the main connection that occurs to me to make logical sense is Ebussuud also has a number of very interesting fatwas on the status of churches in the Ottoman Empire. They are interesting, but they're very laconic. He was known for being a mass producer of fatwas who told, or you could say bragged to a disciple that on one day he issued 1,412 in that single day. And so they're quite laconic. But the status of churches, and there's a famous article, well, famous in, I suppose, 18th century Ottomanist circles by Roderick Davison on the status of the Church of the Vosografa, a Russian Orthodox church, as I recall, according to the 18th century Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca that ended the Russo-Turkish War under Catherine the Great of 1768 to 74, is a major diplomatic point. I do think that Russia's not in the 16th century yet extending and consciously trying to protect churches, although there's already in the 16th century a correspondence that I've learned about recently between the Russian czars and certain Hyro monks, heads of Orthodox monasteries in Istanbul and other places within the Ottoman Empire about subsidies, essentially, to maintain libraries and maintain the grounds and buildings of their monasteries. So yeah, ecclesiastical buildings, and of course the famous controversy over the theological school on the island of Halki that was closed in 1971, which is off the coast of Istanbul, is certainly a point of continuity over the centuries involving Russia.
Yeah, I think thank you for that. That's a really interesting starting point that maybe we can, as I said, reverse the order of papers. And Ebru, any comments on that?
Yeah, sure. I also wanted to say that yesterday the keynote speech of Mr. Sakwa was, for me, it's very thrilling because I was using his conceptions already, and I also share his idea that Russia's position in this world order is not to make any new hegemony of Russia itself, but it's like it's an anti-hegemonic, multipolar world order, what Russia wants. And I don't know, there's maybe a plus that Russia lacks the soft power to force some of its policies on the outside region of the former Soviet countries. So in this respect, Russia has to use its diplomacy actually, because otherwise Russia doesn't have so much interest to include militarily in a region to confront West or United States in the region like Middle East, or it's not strongest to confront China in Asia. That's why diplomacy is very important for the future of the country, future of the world order, to have a balanced relationship between the global powers, not the superpowers of the world. And here, I believe that the middle powers has more a role to push for this kind of diplomacy that can bring great powers like United States and China to the table, to force them to have more justified, more justice to the international order. I think this is what I could say about the diplomacy and the Russian role.
Okay, I think the next one we go the reverse order, Rahimullah.
Thank you. To be specific, so to evaluate or to comment on the Russian role in the contemporary world order, RTC and regional order. So there is a term used for the Russia and China and the region based. Both states or both actors are immediate but unreliable partner. So this creates a kind of different order because China is trying to use its economic leverage in the region, and that could cope up with the Russian political influence. And also during the pandemic, we saw as previously I have heard in other panel as well, that during this Corona time, Russia used most of its leverage over the Central Asia because of those economic and the migration circulations and other factors. So we see those the Russian political influence is declining, even if they're trying. And militarily, I don't see any signs or any the Russian interest to engage. But even politically, we see China is trying to substitute, or even on the way to substitute, the Russian role in the region. And the region is also, if you use the Bezen and Weber term, regional security complex. So Russia, the securitization and desecularization of Central Asia is coming. Also, there are also centrifugal factors, factors, which bringing the region together. Are also some factors that is trying to divide the region. So Russia has no much influential role in the region. So they are trying to politically involve, but the role is, seems declining. So this was my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the next is, when we go reverse, as I said, Javadbay, do you want to say anything? Is he still here?
Well,
yeah.
Yes, could you hear me? About Russian factor in this, particularly like in west of Russia, Georgia, Ukraine, Russia is very important like state, particular for these countries, influencer, because due to its historical togetherness as a part of Soviet Union. So Russia has not anything ideological or economical offer for these nations. Russia authoritarian state and also not democracy. So, and economically also is not very like gives. Yes, most of these nations of these countries go to as a migrants to work in Russian markets. However, not like does not offer anything in the development of these countries like Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, or Central Asian countries. Therefore, I believe that in order to prevent integration of all these post-Soviet states, Russia create local conflicts in this country, because in order to integrate with NATO or European Union, these countries have to solve their territorial conflict between themselves. Any government in these countries would not let South-Ossetia or in Ukraine let Luhansk and Donetsk to be independent, to be separated from their country. Any government have no chance to stay in power. So therefore, Russia tries to create these territorial conflicts. When I come to talk about Russia as a multipolar world order, tries, well, what I understand Russia's from my readings of Russia, because Russia alone could not challenge United States or European Union in the world. So therefore it tries to create like a alliance of the other great powers, or like positive messages to other great powers that let's challenge hegemony of United States and let's build multipolar world. Because for instance, if definitely Russia had enough strength economically or militarily, they would alone try to challenge United States. But since they have no this power, therefore they try to pretend that they are prefer multipolar world. And what does it mean? In near abroad of the Russia, nobody will challenge Russia's hegemony. That's all by me. Thank you.
Yeah, that is really good points. There are a few issues that I'm sure if you haven't noticed, I managed to get the group chat to be active again. If you have any questions to each other's papers, just type there. It looks like it's a small group of us that, or you could just, you know, unmute yourself and ask the question. And lastly, Bezen, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, would you like to add something on the Russian factor?
Yes, actually in APkhazla case and also Javadbay's South-Ossetia case, Russia is actually, it's part of the conflictual sites. So we cannot talk about Abkhazia or Georgia without talking about Russia and its role in the conflict and also in conflict resolution. So that makes it quite difficult for a case of Abkhazia to resolve, because Russia is both part of the conflict and also will be part of the conflict resolution. And in the Caucasus region, there is no other powerful mediator that could stay on the table, negotiation table with Georgia, Russia, and Abkhazia actually. Maybe while I was writing my chapter, I was thinking about the role of Turkey, because Turkey is both close to Georgia, also has strategic partnership with Russia and proximity to Abkhazia. Maybe Turkey could mediate such a conflict resolution. But as you said, the conflicts are frozen. Nobody hurts each other, at least physically. There is no physical conflict. But this unresolved conflict, frozen conflicts, it hurts economically and socially to societies, Georgian society and Abkhazian society. So at some point, they need to sit on the table. And in this case, we need a mediator that could tell Russia, Georgia, and Abkhazia to sit on the table and start negotiate. So we need a mediator that could use its power over Russia to start mediation. So it's really difficult in the Caucasus region.
Yeah, I think Bezen, while you are still muted, there's a question for you. One of the causes of bitterness in Georgia regarding Abkhazia is the fact that ethnic Georgians were expelled from Abkhazia in the early 1990s. Without them being allowed to return, is there any chance of the conflict being resolved in the long run? And I think that question is also for Javadbay, if you want to answer after that.
Okay, thank you for the question. Actually, my chapter has a very long history of the conflict. But I focus on the Abkhazian part, but also read a lot about the Georgian part of the conflict. And so the region is amazing, actually, starting with the Russian Empire. The populations, people always, they forced to change places. The demographic changes, population changes, particularly in 80s, 60s, this Circassian exile, it's very hurtful for all the Circassian nations in the region. So, and of course, as soon as the Abkhazians find a new field of maneuver after the dissolution of Soviet Union, they did the same to Georgians. So they expelled the Georgian population from Abkhazian lands. So that's why I didn't go into detail, but the demographic change is amazing. At some point, they expelled Abkhazians from Abkhazian land, and they moved Greeks, Armenians, and other different ethnicities in Abkhazian land. And Abkhaz people, they forced to leave certain areas in their own land. So it creates the bitterness against Georgians. And they did the same as soon as Soviet Union dissolved. So this bitterness continues. It's same in the Cyprus, actually. So in Palestine and Israel, it's the same situation. So people forced to leave their places, and the resolution mostly based on the prospect of getting their land or homes back. after a conflict resolution. So it's one of the problems with among the Georgians and the Abkhazians. Thank you for the questions. Let me give an elaboration of the history of conflict at this. Thank you.
Thank you. Javadbay, do you want to add anything on this question?
Well, yes. Well, it is also a very important point of this South Ossetia conflict, because the South Ossetia, Georgians and also Ossetians really live it in mixed. So there is not, there were only Tsingvali, the capital of the South Ossetia, that majority of them was Ossetian. So the regions, villages really was contested, like around 70, 30%, 40, 60%. So they really lived in mixed. After 2008 wars, so there was this conflict cleansing, and in every wars, when Georgians took the regions, they cleansed Ossetians, and when Ossetians and Russians actually took Georgian living regions, they cleansed it. So it is really like a most important point to resolve the conflict. But until that period, I believe that we need to they need to build a confidence between two communities, that they don't see each other as a threat to their survival. So I believe that first we should pave the way, particularly for ethnic conflicts. We should need to pave a road that people, community level, they trust each other. So after that, for instance, in a survey, Ossetians said that we don't trust Georgian government and Georgians, because whenever they come to this our land, they try to conduct ethnic cleansing towards us. So if we would achieve this point, it means that we are on the edge of building sustainable peace between them. So it is, well, yes, it is very important point, but I don't know how we will achieve, only with a community dialogue between societies.
Okay, great. I think there are three. That's really to the point answers. And we have three new questions. One of them is for Matthew. Can you elaborate Ottoman imperialism, please? Because in Turkey, we have never think Ottoman imperialism, Ottoman Empire as imperialism. And then Bezen, your question is, do you think the concept of the desecratization can be used as conflict resolution? Ebru, do you think that Russia's move to its embassy to Jerusalem, like USA, because there are Soviet Jews in Israel more than 10%, and Jews in Russia are also an important factor in Russian politics? Again, shall we start with Matthew and then Bezen and Ebru?
Sure, but it's a large subject, and I guess if you're asking simply about the word imperialism, I am not somehow tied and chained to this word. We could just talk about Ottoman expansion, but there have been historians who have looked at different periods of Ottoman expansion and sought to look at the differences, for instance, in my case, between the conquest of Cyprus and what happens just about 100 years later when the Ottomans conquer Crete. And there are different laws that are applied, different systems of land tenure that are introduced. And so I think it's legitimate to examine the differences in the way that conquests proceeded over time. Imperialism is, of course, to put it mildly, loaded word with, depending on who you're talking to, a great number of associations, few of which are positive. So I'm not surprised that you press me on the point, but I'm not arguing for it kind of ex nihilo. I'm certainly not the creating it myself. There are an increasing number of works that have tried to talk about various aspects. Ephraim Karsh's book, Islamic Imperialism, is one, but then specifically about the Ottoman case. And, you know, one should at least perhaps consider whether people in large areas of the Balkans in the late 14th century would have felt themselves exactly liberated by the conquerors. I mean, one doesn't have to use the word imperialism. One shouldn't also go to the other extreme, maybe, and stick one's head into the sand, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's great, Matthew. I mean, as you say, it depends how you define empire first, and then imperialism. It's definitely essentially contested concept that we could take hours, but we need to finish in 5 minutes. That I'll move to the next speakers. I think Bezen and Ebru again in 2 minutes maximum, please.
Sure. Regarding the question about desecuritization, Sezai Hocam, I didn't read the discourse, I didn't do the discourse analysis of the leaders, Abbasian and the Georgian leaders in detail, but as far as I understand from my readings and my analysis, in Abkhazia Georgian case, we have seen just signs of normalization, starting with they start talking about the legalization of trade between the two countries. For desecuritization, I think it's it's quite early to think about this conflict resolution from a desecuritization point of view. I think for now we have just signs of normalization. But maybe later on, after they succeed in legalization of trade and transit routes and everything, maybe they start desecuritize their language.
Okay, thank you, Bezen. Ebru,
thanks for the question. First of all, I don't think that soon Russia is going to move its embassy to Jerusalem, because Russia is so strict about the Palestinian problem, and it's the application of international law and United States Security Council resolutions, which is stating that Jerusalem is divided in a Jewish part, Israeli part, and the Palestinian part. And without the solution of this, Russia wouldn't, I believe, that move its embassy. And about the Soviet Jews in Israel, yes, they are like 10%, and there is an important Russian-speaking population in Israel, and these Russian-speaking Israelis are an important part of Putin's political discourse to show that how Israel and Russia have great relations. It's even Putin once said that Israel is almost a Russian country, but actually I cannot find so much effect of the Russian-speaking population on the relations, because Russian-speaking population is not just it's not just coming from the Russian Federation, but they are also coming from Ukraine, for example, or coming from the Eastern European countries. So the fact that they are speaking in Russian is not definitely meaning that they are supporting Russia in its policies or for the better relations for with the Israel of it. So it's most part of a political discourse. It's not going so forward because Russia is lacking this soft power to use its Russian-speaking population. That's my answer going to be.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. It's really taking us to the on time. Thank you for, I think, participants for asking. It has been a really great pleasure to chair this session. Very interesting panels, and I'm wishing you all really the best in your research. And this is going to end our session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you. It was
Bye.
nice.
Bye.
Bye.